There's a sound that takes you back immediately. Not music, not a voice, just the particular clunk and hiss of a percolator on a stovetop, pushing coffee up through the glass knob on the lid, brown and steady, like a small heartbeat starting the house. You didn't even drink coffee yet, but that sound meant morning was real. That sound meant the day was beginning, and somewhere nearby, a parent was already awake, and for a few seconds, the world felt entirely in order. That's where this starts. Not with dates or headlines or anything you'd read in a history book. With that kind of sound. The kind that doesn't exist in a recording anywhere, but lives perfectly preserved somewhere in the middle of your chest, waiting for exactly the right prompt to surface. The 1970s. If you were there, really there, old enough to feel the texture of it, young enough that it was still forming you, you don't need anyone to explain what it meant. You already know. But sometimes it's worth sitting with someone who wants to remember it alongside you. Because that decade had a particular quality that's hard to describe to someone who wasn't in it. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't polished, but it had weight. It had smell and sound and a specific kind of stillness that belonged only to it. This isn't about whether things were better. It's about what was true. What you actually felt standing in the kitchen in bare feet while the radio played something you didn't choose, but somehow still know every word to. What it was like to exist in a world that moved at a pace you could feel with your whole body, not just flick past with a thumb. That world was yours, and it shaped you in ways you're probably still discovering. So let's go back. Not to escape, just to remember what it felt like to be there. The mornings had a specific weight to them. Before the day picked up its noise and momentum, there were these quiet minutes when the house was just waking up. Curtains going gold at the edges before anyone had pulled them. That percolator still working away. The smell of toast just starting to darken under the grill. In a lot of homes, the kitchen was the first warm room. Bedrooms were cold. You learned that early. You pulled your clothes under the covers with you at night so they'd be less agonizing to put on in the morning. That small trick passed from sibling to sibling like it was classified information. The radio was always on. Not as background, not as ambient noise the way music gets used now. The radio in the 1970s was a presence. It had a schedule. Certain voices belonged to certain times of day. You didn't choose what played. You listened to what came. And oddly, that meant you knew the same songs as everyone else. Your neighbor, your classmate, the kid across town who you'd never meet. You all knew the same chorus, had the same reaction to the same DJ saying the same thing at 8 in the morning. There was a shared soundtrack to that decade, and it played through the same crackling speakers in kitchens everywhere. Breakfast wasn't complicated. It was whatever was in the house, and it was eaten quickly because the day had a schedule whether you were ready for it or not. School didn't wait. The bus didn't wait. And the rules around time, being where you were supposed to be, when you were supposed to be there, were enforced without negotiation. You knew this not because anyone sat you down and explained it, but because you'd seen what happened when you were late. The look was enough. That specific look that said nothing and everything. Here's something worth holding on to for a moment. The bag. The school bag. Maybe canvas. Maybe fake leather that cracked at the corners by February. Heavy in a way that seemed unreasonable for a child's body. Packed the night before because mornings already had too many moving parts. That bag is going to come back up. Remember it. Getting to school was its own daily expedition. A lot of kids walked, not because their parents were indifferent, but because walking was what you did. You knew your route the way you knew your own handwriting, automatically, without having to think about it. The cracks in the pavement, the garden with the dog that came to the fence, the shortcut through the alley that smelled like damp brick after it rained. You navigated by landmarks you'd given your own names to: the blue gate, the big tree, the corner with the sweet shop that opened just late enough to tempt you on the way home, but just early enough to make you late if you stopped. And the sweet shop, if you were lucky enough to have one on your route, was a small kingdom. Not a store, a kingdom, with jars. You remember the jars, lined along a shelf in rows, filled with things in shades of red and orange and green that weren't found in nature, weighed out in paper bags by someone who knew your regular order without being asked. A few pennies could purchase genuine happiness, not the complicated, conditional kind of happiness that comes with too many choices. The simple, immediate, this is exactly what I wanted kind. You kept that bag in your pocket, and the smell leaked through the paper all afternoon. School in the 1970s deserves its own chapter, though it won't get one here. It'll just arrive in pieces, the way it probably exists in your memory, the desk that wobbled on one leg. The smell of the gymnasium on a winter day, like rubber and steam and old wood. Chalk dust that got into everything. The board rubber that someone would clap against the wall outside if the teacher wasn't watching, sending up a little cloud. The register being called, and the specific pressure of waiting for your name, hoping your voice would come out the right size when it did. Handwriting mattered. This sounds like a small thing, but it wasn't. You practiced it. You were corrected on it. There were people who had beautiful handwriting and people who did not, and everyone knew which category they were in. Your pen had weight. The nib had personality. Ink could be a disaster or a source of deep satisfaction, and sometimes both in the same afternoon. If you had ink on your fingers by 3 o'clock, you'd been working. You wore it like a badge. Teachers were a category of persons set apart from ordinary adults. They had authority that wasn't explained or earned in front of you. It simply existed, architectural, like the school building itself. Some of them were genuinely brilliant. Some were frightening. Some were tired in a way you could feel, but didn't yet have language for. A few of them said something to you once that you carried for years without knowing you were carrying it. You might still be carrying it now. That's worth sitting with. Lunchtime had its own social ecosystem, complex enough to require a documentary. Where you sat, who you traded with, what was in your lunchbox versus what you wished was in your lunchbox. The kid who always had crisps. The kid who always had something unidentifiable wrapped in foil that steamed slightly when opened. The hierarchy of biscuits. The fact that certain snacks conferred status in a way no adult would understand if you tried to explain it. These things were serious. They were negotiated with the gravity of international diplomacy. Now, here's a scene. Close your eyes for a second if you want, though you don't have to. It's after school, late afternoon, that particular autumn light that comes in low and slightly orange, making everything look like a photograph of itself. You're outside, not because anyone planned an activity or organized anything. You're outside because inside was where grown-ups were, and outside was yours. The street, the alley, the field at the end of the road, the car park behind the shops that was empty on weekday evenings. You had territory. It wasn't marked on any map, but everyone knew it. You and whoever was out that day, making up the rules as you went, arguing about the rules immediately after making them, then forgetting there were rules and just playing. Your knees knew that tarmac. Your hands knew that tree bark. Your feet knew exactly how far you could go and still be back before the light failed completely. Because the light mattered. When it got dark, you went in. That was the agreement, never spoken, just understood. The streetlight coming on was the signal, not a parent calling, not a watch, just the light. and something in your body knew it. You'd be mid-game, fully absorbed, and then the light would click on and you'd feel it. Time. You wrapped things up, said what you needed to say, and headed back. Through the front door, which was sometimes locked and sometimes wasn't, depending on the house and the day, and whether your mother had gone next door for something and expected to be back before you. Evenings were the quietest, most domestic part of the day. Homework at the kitchen table while someone cooked. The smells of whatever was on the hob, something long and slow, or something quick and simple, depending on what day it was and how tired everyone felt. Families had rotation. Certain meals belonged to certain nights. You might not be able to name the days of the week without thinking, but you could tell what day it was by what was on the table. Tuesday smelled a certain way. Friday smelled different. That kind of knowing lives very deep. Television was not casual. You didn't have it on all the time, ambient and endless. There were channels, a small number of channels, and they broadcast specific things at specific times. And when something was on, you watched it, because there was no other option. No rewind, no catch-up. If you missed it, and you heard about it from everyone at school the next day, which was its own kind of pain. So you didn't miss it. You were there, in front of that set, at the right time. The television itself was furniture. It had weight and presence. Some had wooden cabinets. Some had those massive dials that clicked between channels with a satisfying chunk of resistance. The picture took a few seconds to warm up, brightening slowly from a dark point in the center, like a secret being revealed. The color, if you had color, and not everyone did at the start of the decade, was slightly surreal, a little more saturated than life, which made everything on screen feel both more and less real at the same time. Here's the second scene. Evening now. The living room. Curtains drawn because it's dark out, and drawing the curtains was what you did when it got dark. It sealed the room in, made it its own world. The fire, if you had one, or the electric heater that glowed orange and smelled faintly of dust. The sofa was specific, not generic comfortable, specifically, weirdly comfortable in the exact way that only that sofa was, in the exact position you always took, which was yours by unspoken agreement because that's how families work. Someone has the chair, someone has the corner. These are not negotiated, they simply are. The television is on. The sound is turned to the right level. Not too loud because someone might be on the phone, and the phone's in the hall, and you had to be able to hear it. The phone comes back later. Hold that thought. There's something about being in a room with your family in the evening that doesn't translate to language very well. Not always harmonious, not always peaceful, but present. Everyone occupying the same space, the same air, the same program. You didn't need to talk. Sometimes the not talking was the whole point. A particular kind of together that doesn't require words to be real. On certain evenings, there was sound from the kitchen late. A kettle, a chair scraping, a parent who'd stayed up longer than everyone else. If you woke up and heard those sounds, the house still felt held. Someone was awake. Someone was watching. You could go back to sleep. The phone. Right. It was in the hall, almost always. And it was the household phone, which meant it belonged to everyone and no one, which meant certain rules applied. You didn't tie it up. You didn't make personal calls of indefinite length. If someone was expecting a call, you kept it short. If you were the one making the call, especially to a friend, especially for a reason that an adult might consider frivolous, you did it with a particular awareness that the cord only reached so far and the hall was not private. Privacy on the phone required ingenuity. You stretched the cord around the corner if you could. You spoke quietly. You developed a kind of code with your closest friend, shorthand, implication. The ability to communicate an entire situation in 3 careful words because anything more and someone might hear. And yet, somehow, everything that needed to be said got said. Friendships ran deep on very little contact time. You saw each other at school. You might see each other on weekends if logistics allowed. In between, there was nothing. No text, no message, no way to reach someone except that hallway phone. And yet the friendship held. It held because when you were together, you were really together. Undivided. No part of you elsewhere. Here's a small moment of comic truth. You called a friend's house and their parent answered. This required a whole performance. "Hello, could I speak to?" And you said their name with the polite formality of a business call, and the parent might say, "Just a moment," or might ask who was calling, which required you to give your full name to someone's mother in a way that felt oddly formal for a person whose height was still being measured against the kitchen door frame. Then there was the wait while they went to get your friend, and you stood in the hall with the phone pressed to your ear, hoping no one in your own house needed to make a call in the next 3 minutes. The 1970s had specific textures. Carpet that was slightly too thick, and in a shade of brown or orange that was completely sincere. Not ironic, not retro, just the color that people chose because they genuinely found it warm and agreeable. Wallpaper with patterns that repeated every 18 inches. Formica surfaces. Curtains with a certain weight to them. Crockery that matched because matching crockery was something people invested in, not something that happened by accident. The mug that was slightly too large. The plate with the chip on the rim that everyone knew to avoid. Materials felt different then. Not better, different. More solid in some ways, more limited in others. Objects were repairable. If something broke, the first response was not to replace it, but to fix it. There was someone in almost every community who fixed things. Shoes, small appliances, watches, upholstery. And the fixing was unsentimental. It was practical. Things were supposed to last, and they were expected to. If something lasted long enough, it became yours in a deeper way than any new thing could. Yours because you'd had it through enough time that it had absorbed some of your history. This brings up the bag again. That school bag, cracked and heavy and faintly ink-stained by mid-year. You didn't get a new one because this one broke. You got a new one at the start of the next year, and even then, reluctantly. In between, you managed. The strap got knotted where it frayed. A buckle got replaced with a safety pin for a while, then with a proper buckle because someone in your house was the kind of person who kept spare buckles. The bag kept going, and you kept carrying it through rain and sun and every unremarkable Tuesday because that was what you did with things that still worked. The outdoors had a quality in the 1970s that feels worth naming. It wasn't picturesque. Most of it was pretty ordinary. Streets, parks, patches of scrubland, the alley, the churchyard, the embankment behind the train tracks. But it was completely accessible and completely available, and you used all of it. You weren't supposed to go some places, but you went anyway, because the going was part of it. Discovery required a little transgression sometimes. You found places that felt like they were yours specifically, a gap in a fence, a section of wall that was climbable, a tree that had one perfect branch at exactly the right height. You went back to those places. They held something for you that didn't have a name but was absolutely real. The seasons were more distinct then, or at least they felt that way. Winter meant cold in a genuine, prolonged way. Not a few brisk days, but actual cold that settled in and stayed. Ice on the inside of windows, your breath in the bedroom. The particular misery and luxury of a hot water bottle. Summer meant heat without air conditioning, which meant lying on the grass, meant water from the garden hose, meant the precise temperature of a tin bath or an inflatable paddling pool in afternoon sun, which was almost too warm, but not quite. Spring was mud. Autumn was leaves and the particular smell of coal smoke beginning again as the evenings cooled. You had a physical relationship with weather because you couldn't escape it. You dressed for it, planned around it, complained about it with genuine intimacy. The third scene, this one outside. Saturday morning. Yours. No school. Whatever needed doing could be done later or by someone else, or it could wait. You're out before 10, which in summer means the dew's still on the grass if there's grass, or the pavement's still dark in the shadows if there isn't. The street's quiet in a weekend way, different from the weekday quiet, which is purposeful and rushing. This quiet is loose. A few doors down, someone's washing a car. Somewhere further, a lawnmower starts up, stutters, starts again. You have nothing in your hands and nowhere specific to be. That feeling of pure, unscheduled possibility was something you might have taken for granted then, but your body knew it. You can feel it now described like this: the sense that the morning was open and it was yours, and something might happen, but it hadn't yet, and the not yet was its own pleasure. You went somewhere, maybe to find a friend, maybe just to walk and see what was happening. You stopped to watch something, workmen digging a hole, a delivery of something large and mysterious, a dog on an unexpectedly long lead. You weren't looking for anything in particular. That was the point. The looking without looking. The way the morning opened up when you didn't push it. In the afternoon, maybe there was sport, or the possibility of sport. The makeshift game in the road that had to pause for cars and resumed the instant the car passed, as if the car was an interruption in an otherwise unbroken activity, which it was. The rules of the game negotiated on the fly. The goalposts that were jumpers, which everyone agreed to, even though the agreed size of a jumper goal was always disputed the moment it mattered. The argument that ended in temporary silence and then resumed, not because it was resolved, but because the game was more important than winning the argument. Music comes into all of this in a way that's hard to quantify. The 1970s were musically extraordinary. You know this now, can see it in retrospect. But at the time, it was just what was there. The records in the house, the albums that got played on Sunday afternoons, the portable cassette player, if you had one, with its small speakers that made everything sound slightly smaller than it should, but no less loved. The mixtape, which was a genuine art form, requiring patience and timing and a devotion to someone or something that was expressed through curation. You pressed play and record at the same time. You waited for the song. You hoped nobody talked during the good part. Making a mixtape was a statement. It took time, real time. You couldn't speed it up. You had to sit with it, track it, be present for the whole thing. And what you made was yours, a physical object that carried your choices and your taste and your feeling about whoever you were making it for. When you handed it over, you were handing over something of yourself. That's not a metaphor. That was literally what was happening. The things that connected people in the 1970s were slower and required more effort, and because of that, they meant more. A letter, an actual handwritten letter with your actual handwriting, remember the handwriting, folded into an envelope, addressed with care, sent, and then waited for. Waiting was not optional. You waited several days for a reply. During those days, you thought about what you'd written. You wondered how it had been received. You composed the next letter in your head before the reply arrived. The correspondence was a relationship of its own, separate from but parallel to the actual relationship. There's a tenderness in that I don't want to romanticize, but also don't want to dismiss. The effort was the message. Putting time into something was how you showed that it mattered, and you received that message when it came back to you, when the envelope arrived with your name on it in handwriting you recognized, and you took it somewhere slightly private to open it, even if the contents were ordinary. The object itself was not. Growing up in the 1970s meant operating inside a system of rules that were largely unspoken. You learned what was expected, not from a manual, but from watching, from getting it wrong, from a look or a word that recalibrated you. Manners were expected in public, not performed, just expected. You held doors. You said please and thank you, and meant it, or at least sounded like you meant it, which eventually amounted to the same thing. You waited your turn. You introduced yourself. You behaved in front of other people's parents in a way that represented your family, because representing your family was something you did whether you'd agreed to or not. Adults had authority. This wasn't always comfortable and wasn't always right, and there were moments that, with hindsight, look different than they did at the time. But there was also something in it that carried a kind of weight, the sense that the adult world was real and had standards, and you were being prepared for it. That preparation was sometimes rough, and sometimes gentle, and sometimes completely inconsistent, but it was happening. You were being shaped by it, which means it worked in at least some of the ways it was supposed to. The bittersweet part, if there is one, is this. A lot of that was invisible to you while it was happening. The ordinary days, the unremarkable evenings, the Tuesday smells and the Saturday mornings and the school bag strap and the corner shop with the jars. You didn't know you were living something. You just lived it. And then time moved and the decade ended and you moved through the ones that followed, carrying all of it without quite knowing you were carrying it. Until something, a smell, a particular light, a sound like a percolator, surfaces it all at once. You were shaped by a time that had its own particular color and sound and weight. Not perfect, nothing is perfect, but yours. Specific to the people who were in it, the streets you walked, the rooms that held you, the voices on the radio you didn't choose but somehow still know by heart. And there are other people out there who know exactly what you're talking about when you talk about all of this. Exactly, not approximately. They were in it too. So here's what I want to ask you, and please take a minute with this in the comments because I genuinely want to know. What was the one thing in your house in the 1970s that you can still smell or hear perfectly in your memory? Not a major event, just an object or a small daily ritual that somehow recorded itself completely. The percolator, the particular soap, the sound of a specific door, the smell of Sunday. Whatever it is, I want to hear it. And the second question, was there a place you went to that felt entirely yours? A corner, a field, a route, a room, somewhere that belonged to you in a way that nothing in the adult world had claimed yet. Tell me about it. Those specific answers, the small and particular ones, are the best kind. If these memories feel like yours, if something in the last few minutes made you remember something you hadn't thought about in years, then this channel might be worth staying with. One quiet subscription is all it takes. The decade ended, as decades do. Life picked up its next pace and carried you forward, as it does. But somewhere back there, a percolator is still going on a cold morning, pushing coffee up through the glass, steady and small and completely real. The light is coming gold through the curtains. The radio is playing something you know every word to. You didn't know then that you were in the middle of something you'd carry for the rest of your life. You do now.